Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back again to go over the gameplay and some more impressions that I've had after getting an opportunity to play Disc for 10.2 in the Proving Grounds. Now, the Proving Grounds isn't perfect, but it's great to be able to see how the specs healing actually feels, where the power is coming from, and be able to put some of our abilities into action. So first off, I want to talk about positives, the things I really am enjoying about the spec at the moment, then talk about how there's some of the challenges coming in for rating, as well as some potential challenges when it comes to Mythic Plus, and then some that are going to be affecting both. First and foremost, I am a huge fan of having a simplified damage rotation. Some of my favorite times in playing Disc over the years has been things like BFA, where you had a few amount of abilities, but they all felt very impactful and very strong. Having like 11 or 12 different damage abilities, like I talked about, 2 months ago in my save Disc video, having so many damage abilities always feels like there's winners and losers, where there's some abilities which are just so bad that they're just barely worth casting and feel unsatisfying to take advantage of. I think it's really good to have smite spam be a thing, as long as your smites actually contribute valuable healing. Schism and Shadow Covenant being simplified feels good, and it's something that people have been asking for ad nauseum. I personally kind of would have preferred Schism stayed and then Mind Blast got removed, but whatever. It is kind of odd having them both rolled together, and then Mind Blast is the one that wins out on top, but so it goes. It also means, however, that Harsh Discipline, Twilight Equilibrium, and Expiation, 3 amazing talents for most of this expansion, are all really heavily butchered. Harsh Discipline becomes a bit worse quite worse, because it's based off your radiances and it's not a guaranteed chance. Twilight Equilibrium is severely lacking when you are lacking shadow spells to cast. And Expiation, of course, gets worse when you don't have a lot of Mind Blast to take advantage of. So all 3 of those abilities need to be iterated upon, and I think it's actually okay if they're adding some level of complexity back into the mix. Harsh Discipline, for example, was a lot of work when you also had to worry about using Schism and Shadow Covenant and making sure you had Purge the Wicked uptime so you could take advantage of Expiation and still weave shadow spells. Like, all of those things together is too much. But it's okay to have a talent or two in the final tier that is changing up your gameplay or having some kind of requirement of you in order to adjust how you play to get the reward. That, I think, is okay. And so I want to make sure I clarify that we don't need to fully simplify everything so it's Babytown Frolics. We just need to be able to have a little bit of a drawdown, not swing the pendulum completely in the opposite direction. Ultimate Penitence is amazing, super cool, and like in the last video, you are just descending into the sky, gaining an absorb shield, and firing down penance bolts all over the place. Couple of weird things going on right now. I believe it is working with Blaze of Light modifier, so you're buffing the penance damage, but it doesn't seem to be getting buffed by Shadow Covenant, and there's some weird oddity of whether it's going to offensive or defensive penance bolts that are being sent out, depending on the targets that you have. Would really prefer it's just a very simplified Divine Toll. You target an enemy and you just funnel a million bolts, even if it's a single target. Or if there is, casting it on an ally, you're just casting it on multiple nearby allies or something like that. That, I think, would be preferable for most everybody, so you know what you're getting. And also, it really should be spreading Purge the Wicked. If you're saying you're casting penance bolts, it should do what penance does, right? I don't think that's too terribly hot of a take. I will say that we have had a number of times over the years where Disc has had really, really powerful abilities. Notably, we had Kyrian Disc Priest with Boon of the Ascended, where you were having the entire sort of pie of atonement healing, and so much of the pie was being cut away and given to Shadowlands Covenant abilities. We had it in Nathria, where it was Mind Games. We had it for most of the rest of the expansion when it was Boon of the Ascended, and your Smite and your Penance and everything just felt really bad because all the power was concentrated in those Covenant abilities where you would do your healing. I really like Ultimate Penitence, and I want it to be good, but I also want to make sure that it's not at the cost of making Smite and Penance feel like garbage and be only some support spells and you're only playing around Ultimate Penitence. That is my fear, and that's something I want to make sure that they are keeping in mind going forward. Atonement, of course, was nerfed for raid from 40% atonement healing to 32%, but there is an independent atonement modifier of increased healing, 50% increased healing for atonement when you are in M+. Now we can figure out the numbers, we can figure out if it's overtuned or undertuned right now. I know it is going to be a nerf for rating. That can change in time. I'm not worried about that. The fact that there's independent variable finally for atonement healing is just utterly wonderful. I am so pleased by it. And that is the most important thing, is that they have a way to adjust one without killing the other. And if you play Disc and you play Disc and Mythic Plus for a long time, you'll know that there's many times that their raid tuning has severely hurt the Mythic Plus tuning. So A+ for that. Now, all is not sunshine and rainbows when it comes to Disc. There are a couple problems, especially when it comes to raid. You are very reliant on Squid, just sort of in general, and in raids it feels kind of weak. Squid, of course, is your 1-minute Mindbender cooldown, where you are getting a lot of cooldown reduction for it, thanks to some of the Void Summoner talents that you have on hand, but you would also be in this position where you're getting a lot of cooldown reduction, and then you hold Squid for the ramps and mini ramps that you're doing, and so you're sort of like swinging back and forth of like, alright, I have to farm enough of this cooldown reduction, and then I don't have to worry about it too much. Having a lot of smites to be able to work off of is wonderful. And it also makes an insane difference when you have your 4-set bonus that gives you the additional smite cast, the Shadow Smite cast, once you cast a regular smite during Shadow Covenant. So that feels great. It feels very powerful and it feels really cool, but it's a really high tick up in strength once you get that 4-set bonus, which is something to be aware of at the very least. Losing, of course, our current 4-set bonus, 2 and 4-set for the instant radiances, feels pretty bad, but like I said in my previous video, you do have to take time to cast those radiances now, but the time to actually put out healing by doing damage is so much lower than I think it kind of makes up for it. So hopefully I don't think it'll be too crazy impactful. Smite, once again, could be stronger, fixed with, 4-piece, high SCOV uptime, and that's fine. But again, reiterating that there is the potential for Ultimate Penitence to take away too much strength from the rest of the spec. Rapture feels really weak. This has been kind of like an ongoing concern with the spec forever, really, it seems. That Rapture just is alright, but it's not giving you some kind of amazing extra power that you would hope for out of a 1.5-minute cooldown. You could honestly just be spamming renews and you just get your same atonement application. So I really would like to see some kind of strength added into Rapture, or some kind of like extra benefit if it's giving you like a haste increase or something, or lower GCD on like your shield, something to be able to like elevate your gameplay a little bit and make it feel a bit stronger. There's a lot of healing done that you get out of Radiance, which feels very significant in keys. But again, it's sort of that overall pie for like where your healing comes from. I don't really feel like it's that necessary to get a lot of healing output out of your Radiance in a raiding environment. And I also think that this is kind of an opportunity for them to make another choice node where you could actually have increased radiance healing or like instant radiances, and then make it like a choice node at the bottom of the tree, so that if you're in a mobile fight and you need to move a lot, you need to have those instant radiances on hand, you could have that. If you wanted to have more healing, you could be able to have that too. Or if you wanted just more atonement damage, you could take that as well and just have more options for how your talent tree shakes up. Because I think, like we said before, there are a lot of talents that need to still be adjusted. Radiance, of course, meaning you have to be standing still all the time. It does sort of bring up certain boss fights where you're moving and trying to complete a ramp, and your ramp might get screwed over by having a mechanic on you. And so having options for how you could adjust your gameplay, even if it results in like a minor HPS increase in like a patchwork fight, could be a really big HPS increase if it helps you handle mobile fights. And I think that would help the spec be a lot more flexible. And for those who just really want to keep those instant radiances, they could also just take that too. In Mythic Plus environment, again, it's a little suboptimal to be using Proving Grounds to test a perfect M Plus environment, because most of the damage is just tank damage. I will say, however, Flash Heal feels really powerful, and that's actually a really good thing. The shield buff is a little noticeable, it's nice, but not anything crazy. But when you Flash Heal a target, they actually push up the health pool, and that feels wonderful. Like I said before, Ultimate Penitence not spreading Purge the Wicked feels pretty bad. I think this is the potential for UP to be a ridiculous M plus cooldown, and also sort of fill in that niche that a lot of players asked for, where they want some way to like already be able to spread Purge the Wicked onto all of their enemies. I think that'd be like perfect, because you'd be able to put up like 1 or 2 Purge the Wickeds, hit uppies, and then you're spreading around all these penances, which are spreading around your Purge the Wickeds, and then you just have everything dotted when you come back down to Earth. I think that'd be so insanely cool, super fun to be able to play around, and it'd also be just a nice way of filling in 2 things that players have wanted for quite a while. I will say, however, with this incoming Mythic Plus environment, having no kick continues, I think, to be a major issue. It sort of pigeonholes priest healers into running like heavy melee comps, which are not always optimal every single season. And there's going to be reduced mind soothe value because there's less humanoids, less dragons in these dungeons, and there's a number of like elementals that you're fighting up against, as well as just like elites that are probably going to have true sight, which will also not be affected by mind soothe anymore. Master spell getting nerfed to a 2-minute cooldown is not the end of the world. It's pretty annoying, especially for a couple of like double debuff type encounters that I think we might have going into the new dungeon pool. Lenience still feels like a really poor choice to have in the final like talent tier, and it's been there forever. And I think this is another opportunity to replace what is just not really an interesting talent, not a fun talent for the spec. So I really hope Lenience at least gets looked at some degree. There still is survivability concerns, just like physical attacks, and in particular, nerfed Angel's Mercy also doesn't feel great either. Your absorbs only go so far to helping you mitigate incoming damage. And of course, Power Infusion getting nerfed when, Twins of the Sun Priestess, where you receive Power Infusion, would just kind of be the general way that you could not have a nerfed Power Infusion for yourself. That would be great, right? And finally, some lasting feedback for what is kind of just a problem in general for Disc. Like I said in my last video, being forced into playing Mindbender Squid is what we call it, just kind of makes a lack of build variety, which is something that Disc has always kind of felt like they had, where you're sort of pigeonholed into one area or another. Harsh Discipline, like I mentioned previously, feels pretty weak, but I do personally like the sentiment of proccing it off of your atonement application. They just need to actually make that stronger, because every single ramp ideally should be having your buffed up Harsh Discipline penance, but it shouldn't feel like it's such a rare thing when it comes to a Mythic Plus environment. Again, stagnancy is really, really big in these talents, to the point that I'm pretty convinced that they're just going to be revamping most of these other talents that exist. Things like Aegis of Wrath being a capstone that has opportunity cost, right? Not only in taking this instead of that, but also if you're using it too early, you just waste value. Wheel and Woe feels like a poor capstone. Twilight Equilibrium is, of course, a terrible capstone when you just don't have many shadow spells to take advantage of, and so that's something that I really heavily expect to get updated. Whereas the very heavy burst that you're getting out of like Overloaded with Light, which is the new Uppies talent, which applies atonement to everybody as you're taking off into the air, that one feels fantastic and powerful and good synergies and a good option if you want to use it in a raid environment, but not something you'd take in a Mythic Plus environment. And that feels great. Big fan of it. I do like how you would play around like Expiation in a lot of cases, where you'd like Mind Blast and make sure you're maintaining your Purge the Wickeds and sort of balance that out with Twilight Equilibrium. But that gameplay, of course, gets pretty neutered when you don't have a lot of Mind Blasts anymore. It's also going to get worse when you're losing your Purge the Wicked damage from your Avaris tier set as well. So some things to keep in mind, that these talents and the power that existed for them is just kind of gone based off the changes that they've made to the base kit. And as a result, they need to flip a lot of these talents and change a lot of them, because that power doesn't actually exist anymore. If Expiation, let's say, on a scale of 1 to 10 was like an 8 or a 9 in terms of its value, well, they changed a lot of the abilities and how they're working, so now this is like a 2 or a 3 or a 1 or something. It's like terrible at this point, because you're just not really using those abilities anymore. You're not casting a Mind Blast every 8 seconds or 6 seconds or something along those lines. You're hitting it like maybe 18 seconds or 19 seconds, if that. If you're not holding it as well for a ramp or holding it for incoming burst damage in a key environment. So it's something to kind of keep in mind. Once again, some better control and expectations for how you could be controlling Ultimate Penitence would be great. When it comes to your tier set bonus, getting the additional Atonement extension off of your Smite cast feels pretty satisfying, but it's extending Atonement based off the lowest health target, which at first impression feels like really cool in keys, because you're like, yeah, I never have to refresh Atonement on the tank because they're the ones always taking damage. But when you realize that like getting a Flash Heal cast into your tank just to maintain Atonement and to give him some side healing is really effective, and you still have Surge procs and Shield is still strong as well, then yeah, it's not like some crazy burden to maintain Atonement on that target. And when you extrapolate this to a raiding environment, then it feels like you're just buffing up Atonement uptime on like one dude who's low, who is going to receive a ton of healing anyway, while you start seeing other people dropping their atonements much more rapidly. So I do hope that they change that. to the lowest atonement uptime. That way you're kind of bringing up multiple different players' atonements for a couple extra seconds of smite, because that just kind of makes sense. That feels like it would be really valuable to be able to have in a raiding environment and provide greater sustain for a raid, which looks, on my first impressions, to have quite a lot more rot damage coming in. So being able to lengthen those ramps and add more value into Smite to make Smite feel better for people, because after about 4 years of Smite feeling like garbage, a lot of people aren't going to be big fans of casting this ability all the time. And so that's an immediate way to be able to show value to this spell by making sure it's hyper efficient in that regard. So we'll see. Those are some of my initial impressions. I am overall very positive for Disc, but I did want to have this video to highlight potential problems and feedback, because I don't think that the changes are over for the spec. We're going to have lots more updates to come. And of course, I'll be providing all the updates, so make sure you're staying subscribed to the channel for all of them. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all next time.